Came here in 1986 to run it for myself in October. I signed the papers and I was owner of the Red Barn Incorporated. People come in here for the experience, more so than I think anything else. And they love the fact that somebody's actually taking the time to listen. Find that balance between doing what you love that isn't really work, that might pay the bills, and more importantly, can resonate with people and actually to some extent help people. That's pretty rewarding. Without my customers, I would be doing what I don't love, guaranteed.
At 7 o'clock, just want to remind you that we'll use the same format that we used last time, where we'll have a department head present material, then the council can ask the department head questions, and then after that, the citizens can ask the department head questions that are specific to that person's, budget line. Okay. And before we start, I need to recuse myself from this one right off because I work for KV-CAP. So.
And Jim Wood from KV-CAP is here. Jim runs the transportation service at KV-CAP, and the city's been a contributor to the transportation service probably since its onset.
1977.
1977, right. The amount that we've contributed, $6,100, has stayed the same for a very long time. The ridership, however, has changed, and that's what Jim asked for a few moments tonight to explain to you how things have really picked up with the bus service ridership. So I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, again, I'm Jim Wood. I'm Transportation Development Director with KV-CAP. Proud to say that I've been with KV-CAP for 44 years now, which for a 49-year-old guy is pretty good. No, and I'm very, very proud of my association with KV-CAP, and I think we've been able to accomplish some pretty remarkable things. As Mike said earlier, we have worked with the city since 1977, I think, when we first put out the public transit system into play. And we consider our relationship with the city to be a very important partnership in the development of public transit. As many of you may know, I think I distributed some rider cards that we have for our public transit program. Now, one thing I do want to explain first, KV-CAP has two distinctly different transportation programs. We have our Kennebec Explorer program, which is a general public bus service. It's available to anybody who wants to ride. There's no eligibility requirements. The eligibility is $1.25 to get on the bus. It runs regular scheduled routes, around the city. We have intercity routes that run between Waterville and Augusta. It's funded predominantly through the Federal Transit Administration with some state funding and some fare box revenue, but requires a heavy local match commitment in order to operate. We also have what we call our KV Van program, which is a demand response program, which is more of a door-to-door subscription service. That's the larger of our two programs, but that's predominantly for main care recipients going to main care covered services, or we have contracts with the Department of Health and Human Services to do protective services transportation, some general low-income transportation, mostly healthcare related. We have several accessible buses and vans, and I know Councilor Soul runs our volunteer driver program, which is, we currently have about 96 volunteer drivers who work for us, that work throughout Kennebec and Somerset County. And
does that include Meals on Wheels? I'm sorry.
No, it does not. This is predominantly, either main care or child protective or general low-income transportation, and they serve, a really broad area. Our service area covers all of Kennebec and Somerset counties. And in the KV Van program last year, we provided over 300,000 rides, and we transported people over 5 million miles. So it's been a widely used service. The funding that we get from the city of Waterville, we use exclusively to cover our match commitments for the Explorer program, for the general public program. We use other funding sources to cover the streams for the other side of the program. Our buses are all accessible to people with disabilities. We did a major system overhaul, and mostly because we got some very good assistance from Maine General Hospital. It provides a large portion of the support for the public bus service to ensure people have access to good health care, but also to help promote the general public bus service. And we launched that in 2011. And of course that service covers the Augusta-Waterville corridor. We still have pretty limited service here in Waterville, but a little more frequent service. But this is what we've been able to accomplish over since 2011 with this chart here. And just to put a scale on it, in 2011, we thought we had a really good year and we did about 44,000 rides. Last year we did 103,000 rides on the public transit system. And what one of our primary goals was with this is to build a system and to prove that when you build good public transit systems, people will use it. And we have a broader scale of ridership than we've ever had before. We have a lot of people now that use the bus to commute back and forth to work. So we've proven if you build good commuter transit, people will use it, and they will use it effectively to get back to work to their own benefit. We have a lot of people using it for healthcare services. Our predominant ridership, both here in Waterville, Augusta, anywhere that we have, and I would dare say anywhere in the state of Maine, the predominant ridership on the public transit system now are elder people who can't operate cars anymore, you know, and Waterville being one of the cities with the eldest population in the state that has one of the eldest per capita populations in the country, I think we're going to have a growing need to take care of people who have lived in our communities their whole life. They want to stay in their communities, they want to stay in the home, but they reach a point where they can't or shouldn't be driving anymore. And what public transit does is provide very good, productive alternatives for that. It allows people to stay vital and active in the communities. Where public transit is most effective, it's a very good economic development driver. You know, it provides access to people to work, it provides improved traffic flows, it provides access to education, to healthcare, to recreational activities. It helps people stay healthy and active in the communities without having to own a car. You know, and I think people now are making choices about the communities that they want to live in based on the availability of public transit. And not surprisingly, I'm here with an ask. I mean, we've been level funded from the city of Waterville for at least 15 years now. And not surprisingly, our costs rise every year. And what we have in Waterville now is what I would consider a minimal bus system. We have a bus that basically serves the Waterville-Fairfield corridor. It runs on a figure-8 loop. If you look on the bus schedule itself, if you look on the back page, we have our route map and the time schedules that it's available. And it serves a very useful purpose. And we served in the Waterville area, we served over 19,000 people last year, which is, you know, it's a lot. And of those 19,000 riders that we did on there were over 1,800 of those people that used the accessible boarding features of the bus, either the lift or the ramp or someone. So these are people with significant disabilities, and there aren't a lot of other alternatives, you know, here in town for anybody that has a disability that's trying to, you know, stay active in the community. We have a vision that Waterville could be one of these communities that people want to locate to. I want to come to Waterville, I want to live here, this is a great place to live. And can I live in Waterville without a car? You know, is the question that people have to ask. If you go to other cities in Maine, you go to Portland, it's a very viable option. You go to Bangor, it's a viable option. Lewiston, Auburn, it's a viable option. Here, not so much. You know, if one of our bus riders wanted to come to this meeting tonight, they would have had to get off the bus at 4:30 this afternoon, and we'll pick them back up at 8:30 tomorrow morning. You know, probably not going to happen. You know, because our buses don't run at night. But you know, we're hoping we have a vision to build a system that works well for everybody in the community. That anybody can come and live in Waterville and function just fine, and can go out at night, enjoy a movie, enjoy a show, go to dinner, do what people do, you know, without having to own a car. You know? And yeah, and so what we've been asking for several years is the subsidy that we receive from Waterville. It's very important because they're matching funds. You know, we get federal subsidies. The federal subsidies have been going up fairly significantly every year. We've had a small increase in state subsidies, although I will be telling you the state of Maine is one of the in the bottom tiers across the country in funding for public transit. Maine, as a state, doesn't fund a lot of it. So it shifts that extra burden to businesses and municipalities. And you know, several years ago, we used to rely solely on municipal contributions to generate our match funds. Now that makes up about 1/3 of the contributions that we have with businesses and, you know, other partners putting in funding too. But we're at the stage now, we're asking Waterville for an increased subsidy for the bus service. I mean, we're asking for $10,000, which really doesn't seem proportionate to what you get. It's a good investment in the community. And also just to think about it in forward-thinking terms of, you know, where we want Waterville to be in several years. I've chaired the Sustained Mid-Maine Transportation Committee for several years now, and you know, public transportation has been a big focus, along with you know, with other alternative transportation modes that that would make Waterville a very sustainable and livable community. And so we're just asking you as a council to think about these options, and we think, and it's been proven over and over in cities across the country that it's a very vital investment in the community, and it pays itself back many times over. And a lot of businesses look at that as an economic development strategy too. You know, a lot of, especially small business owners, can't necessarily afford to pay real high wages. But if you have a good bus service coming into the town, well, now people from outside the community have access to these jobs and stuff without having to incur the expense of owning a car. They may want to, but they don't have to. And it's a reliable resource to get people back and forth to work, or to college, or to healthcare, or to veteran services, to any number of things. So at this point, I'll be happy to answer questions.
I think I have two questions. One is, and I'll say up front, I appreciate the service, and I granted $10,000 probably isn't a big ask. I'm sure any one of us could probably find $10,000 to cut somewhere else to make up for that, should the council decide to do that. But there's a question about, when we talk about people wanting to go to movies and do this and that, we're asking one portion of the community to subsidize another portion of the community, which in the city of Waterville happens already quite a bit. There's one portion of our community heavily subsidizes another portion of the community. Is there, have you, and I don't know if there's rules that go along because you accept federal funding or not. Have you considered changing your fee schedule, or do you have an ability to do it so that those who actually need the subsidy to have a subsidized ride, so they don't have to pay $1.25, they have to pay that, compared to somebody who can absolutely afford to pay $5, because some of us just have to have a car and get to work and have to pay our taxes to subsidize it.
Yeah.
So did you know what I mean? Like, so,
I understand what you're saying. It's
are
not
you
something
locked
that.
in, or are you locked into keeping it so that
Yeah, we
everybody
have to
knows?
advertise our fare schedule so they're predictable and understandable for people. And we could make it more complicated, but we've chosen not to. It really wouldn't benefit most of the members of the community that use it, and so we tried to make it something that's fairly. But we did do a fare increase last year. You know, we needed to. It was the first time in I think 10 or 12 years that we had to do a fare increase, but we did reach the point where it was a necessity. And for a lot of the folks that use the system, you know, even that little, it was a 25% increase, but even that can be a hardship for some people who determines whether they ride the bus 5 days a week or 3 days a week, or, you know, how often they can use it. So, and we provide tickets to the general assistance program too, to help people go out and find community resources.
With the additional funds, if you were to get the additional funds, was it, because you'll get a match for that, obviously.
Right.
Are you looking at increasing your hours of operation, or just having more routes?
Well, I mean, quite frankly, where we're at right now is we're struggling to sustain the system that we have. You know, our costs, like everybody else's costs, you know, we're trying to pay decent wages to our drivers, we're trying to pay for health insurance costs, our maintenance costs are going up, fuel costs are going up, and we're struggling now just to maintain the system that we have. So that's why we're asking our partners to help contribute a little more to keep this. We'd love to be able to, our long-range plans, we have a plan that we developed about 5 or 6 years ago that within the city of Waterville could implement like a 4-bus structure where you got bus service just about everywhere in town, about every half hour throughout the day. I'll tell you right up front, the cost of that to the city would be about $180,000 a year. I mean, I don't see that happening right off.
Not right off.
No, but, you know, as a long-range plan, maybe it can, you know, and.
And you also mentioned that, correct me if I'm wrong, that people also use this to get to work.
Yes, a lot of people do. That was one of the big motivators when we were able to build a bigger system, is when they built the hospital in Augusta. You know, they wanted to ensure that the employees that were previously working in the Waterville area had good access to the hospital, but we have a lot of hospital employees that use it, but we also have some state employees that use it to get back and forth to work, and other people who work at the Commerce Center in Augusta and so on. And that's one of our more popular routes, is the commuter routes in the morning and the
So
afternoon.
Jim, you said we've been paying you the same amount for 15 years?
Yes, and well, just to put that in a bit of a framework, when I mentioned we've been doing this since 1977, in 1977, the city of Waterville gave us $10,000 a year, to run the public transit service. Then we went through a phase where that the public transit system, and I think it's a perception that because we're a nonprofit that runs it, that public transit is a social service, which a lot of communities view it as an essential public service, and they're run by the city, and even in Maine, there's a bunch of cities that run the public transit services themselves. But what happened is we got cut. The city used to fund several different programs within KVCAP, then put it into one umbrella, and then weeded it down to, we're just gonna do transportation, but we're gonna cut the funding. And so they cut the funding from $10,000 to $6,100 about 15 or 16 years ago, and it's been flat ever since.
Has the amount of ridership been level with 15 years as well?
No, not at all. I mean, it's proportionate to that graph that I showed you. I mean, the ridership has gone up considerably, and to the point where we got the bus that we're running around here is quite often at capacity, I mean, we could advertise it a whole lot more, we could do a lot more with it, but my worst fear is that I have, 20 people show up at a bus stop that holds 16 passengers, That's not necessarily a real good scenario, But yes, ridership has grown, and even with the intercity runs, we serve, it goes up around Colby and serves some parts of town, with the hospital and so on, that adds to that ridership too. But we have areas of town that aren't currently being served because we can't, we don't have enough capacity. If we put a second bus on, I would love to be able to serve like the Colby Western Avenue corridor. We're starting to see a growing need too, but right now it pretty much runs a loop out Kennedy Memorial Drive and back, and then comes into downtown and goes out Upper Main Street, hits the hospital, the shopping center, and then loops around through Fairfield and back in, and just runs that loop throughout the day.
Do other communities, like Fairfield, pay you as well?
Yes.
And is Waterville the lowest, or?
Not the lowest, no, but it's a lot, but we've been getting increases from a lot of communities, that we currently right now have like 62 different communities that we have some very, very small subsidies because we don't have a lot of public transit service, so most of that helps, with our capital acquisitions on the other side, but,
What's Augusta right now paying? Is that,
pardon me?
what's Augusta paying?
$30,000.
Of course, they've got a lot more ridership. They've got like 2 or 3 times as much.
Right.
And you're able to provide more routes, I guess, so.
Right, exactly, and we found that the more you can increase the service frequencies, and the more convenient you can make it for people, the more people will use it.
Which would take the pressure off of parking spaces.
Absolutely it does, absolutely. It costs a lot of money to pave and maintain pavement.
Yep.
And a lot of communities, sustainable communities are moving towards that. They're making narrower streets with wider sidewalks that cost less to pave and maintain. And a lot of cities are doing this, they're subsidizing it through parking fees. If you wanna bring a car into the town, that's fine, but you're gonna pay a fee to park your car and use those fees to help pay for the transit service. But if people wanna come in to the community and do what people do, they can take a bus in conveniently. You don't have to worry about finding a place to park. You can just come and do what you do, get back on the bus and go home. And, lots and lots of cities and even smaller communities all over the country do that, and consider it a good investment.
There's also an option to like buy a booklet, right, or like buy several tickets.
We have monthly passes.
Monthly passes.
Yeah, so you can pay like a flat fee every month, and for a local, monthly bus pass is $40, but that gives you an unlimited number of rides for the month, or intercity, it's a $80 pass, but, so some people choose to do that, because economically, it's a little more predictable for them, and.
Are you receiving funding from, 'cause I noticed you stop at the hospitals in Seton Village, you stop, it looks like maybe Thayer and Inland, are they paying you?
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah.
The hospital pays us a lot.
Okay. Which, so it looks like, the traffic is going there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and there's, people give us a lot of money, we try to make sure we take care of them.
obvious demand there as well.
Yeah, it's obvious, you know, and they've been really good partners, but I gotta say, you know, the Waterville Chamber of Commerce has been a good partner also, and that's unusual in a lot of communities. But they give us a subsidy every year too, that really helps, and we pool a lot of different resources together to try to make this all go, but we're asking everybody to give a little more, because it is an important service. And, you know, I think, especially with our aging demographic here in Maine too, I mean, I think we have, you know, we want our people to be able to stay and live and thrive in Waterville, you know, and even when they reach the point where they can't run a car anymore. And I can speak personally to that. I know my dad, I think by most accounts would be considered a pretty model citizen. He lived here in Waterville for over 40 years, owned a house here, raised 6 kids, a college graduate, veteran, and we reached the point where we had to have an uncomfortable conversation because he was running into things on a fairly regular basis, you know, where it's not supposed to be driving anymore, you know. And a lot of families are facing that, you know, and so now what? You know, does the family have to take time off from work and, you know, displace other things to take care of their elder citizens, or are there gonna be other alternatives? And, you know, my dad's worst fear was that he was gonna be a burden to his family, you know, and, you know, we told him that couldn't happen, but nonetheless, that was, you know, his commitment, so. But it did put a burden on the rest of us to take care of him once we made that. And unfortunately, he lived in an area of Waterville where the bus service doesn't frequently run, so even the bus service I run wasn't gonna be all that helpful to him.
Now, the volunteer driver program, are those drivers strictly volunteer, or are they?
They receive a mileage reimbursement, you know, it is considered volunteer service, you know.
Because they use their own vehicle.
They use their own vehicle, yeah, but they all go through background checks, and we do training with them, and, you know, Councilor Sol does some fabulous work with our volunteers, you know. And, you know, he's contributed to a lot of success to that program, but, yeah, our volunteers are essential to the success of our service.
Well, thank you, Jim. Good seeing you.
Thank you, yeah.
Questions from the crowd, I think?
Yeah.
Last question, maybe I missed this. What does Waterville pay now?
$6,100.
61. Thanks.
Marilyn has a question too.
Did I hear you right? Did you mention something about the state having paid something?
Yeah, the state puts, yeah, we get about $87,000 a year in state funding.
And did you say they had reduced that amount?
No, the state actually, that amount has been pretty level funded for several years also, and that increased a few years ago, but it still puts the state of Maine very low in comparison to other states, even New England states, I mean, shockingly low.
Is that proportionately or just the amount?
Well, to put things in.
Because we have a smaller population.
Right. What the American Society of State Highway Transportation Officials, and I hope I'm getting this right, did a study a couple of years ago of state commitment to public transit. And what they did is they broke it down on a per capita basis. So you could compare apples to apples, you know, in states with larger populations versus states with more rural populations. And how it broke out in New England was pretty stunning. In Massachusetts, on a per capita basis, they dedicated over $230 per person to the public transit systems. In Rhode Island, it was $88, Connecticut was about $80, Vermont was $10, and Maine was $1. Yeah.
$1.
$1, yeah. And that's about where we're at now.
Do you know when they started paying?
The state's had a contribution right back since the inception of it, but
And when was the inception?
we started the public transit program back in 1977.
But it's been flat funded.
Yeah. Yeah, and it did have a bump going back probably 5 or 6 years ago now, where the state did increase their subsidy, but it pretty much doubled from about 42,000 to I think it's 87,000 now, but it's been level there for years. We have a bill before the legislature now that's stuck on the appropriations table.
Well, that was the next question I was going to ask, if that was one of the bills.
Yes, it is. That's one of the bills that's stuck on the table. That would actually add a state investment of $1.5 million a year into that, half of which would go to rural systems, the other half to the urban areas, but would also help fund some volunteer networks and some programs for people with disabilities.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Did I understand you right that I can get a ride from here to Augusta for $1?
For $3.50. Yeah, it's, our fare structure is $1.25 in town, $1.50 if you're crossing between two towns, and $3.50 to Augusta.
Okay, yeah. And do you look at a city's demographics when you ask for more money from the city? Because, you know, like Waterville has the situation that I read in the paper, the 5th smallest landmass in the whole state of Maine. And we have the oldest population in the entire state of Maine almost.
Right.
And these people don't have the ability to go out and get a second job.
Right.
Their primary concern is staying in the home. So Waterville is a very unique situation compared to almost any other city in the state. And that's what I heard door to door is, how do we stay in our homes with the bills? So we're very different to almost any city in the state with our demographics and tax structures.
Yeah, I agree with that. That is happening all over Kennebec and Somerset counties, you know, predominantly. I mean, Waterville is somewhat unique in that having a higher than average, you know, median age than most cities, and of course the state has a problem with that also. But doesn't matter what group of people I talk to now, transportation percolates into one of the top 3 issues, you know. And the demand grows constantly, but the resources to deliver it don't necessarily keep pace with that.
I just wondered, do you think the state should take that into account, the fact that we have a more elderly population?
I think they do. What the state is moving to is, up until a couple of years ago, it was all formula funded, where they took population densities. Now, keep in mind, our service area is Kennebec and Somerset counties, so they take the demographics of Kennebec and Somerset counties into account more so than individual cities. What they've been moving to is more of a competitive process with rural transit grants that kind of rewards those systems that are showing the most productivity. And we are fortunate that with demonstrating this type of productivity in our service, we've been able to generate more in federal subsidies and so on, but that has that matching commitment that comes along with it. We can get the federal money, but we have to have the match in order to do that.
I just wondered, have you been down to appropriations and pointed out to them how much less we get in other states?
Yes. One thing was kind of, with the bill that was just LD 1248, which went through, we've had 2 different versions. One got stuck on the appropriation table at the end of the last biennium also. But it came out of the Transportation Committee 13-1 in favor, you know, with the appropriations note to it, with fiscal note attached to it. Yeah, and then it got to appropriations and got stuck, you know, along with a lot of other bills. But just coming out of committee with that kind of support, you know, really showed me that there's a growing demand for it. The need continues to grow.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah. All right, well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today.
Thank you. Watching closely.
We'll keep an eye.
Keep an eye. All right, well, thank you, Jim. Capital improvements, debt service is the next topic, and so I'm gonna invite Dick up, there he is, to join us. Let me just give you a little bit of background before I introduce Dick. So basically, the 2 sheets that Heather passed out, the first one being this one. Oh, and by the way, there are copies of these sheets out back on the table. There are 6 or 7 copies of each. So, you might ask, why would we want to talk about capital improvements when there aren't any planned in the budget? Well, I mean, there is the annual paving amount of $250 that's in the budget, which really is not a capital improvement, it's something we do every year. And the other amount at $185,000, if you're looking at this one-page summary, that other amount is money that we have on hand for the pool, and we've already talked about that. So really, we have 0 in this proposed budget for capital improvements. But we've all talked about a bond issue for next year, and I thought this would be a good time for Dick Ranigan to come in and talk to us, because Dick has been assisting the city as our financial advisor for over 15 years.
Mid-90s, yep.
Mid-90s, over 20 years. And has seen all of our bond issues. So in talking about a bond issue for next year, I thought it would be good for us to ask Dick some questions. I sent out to you today some of the questions that we posed to him earlier, and we can touch on those. Essentially, the second sheet are the items that, you know, we're gonna propose to the council at some point for next year's bond issue, but we don't have to get into a big, of course, we'll get into detailed discussion if people want tonight, but we'll certainly be touching on this again. But the questions are, with another borrowing, how's our debt service look? How do we compare to other communities? On a per capita basis, are we in the middle? Are we high? And I'll pass this around. Dick put this together today, which was very helpful. That shows us where we stand debt service wise. I'll let people get a copy of that before we go further. So if we could basically start with that conversation, because the city has borrowed money 2011, 13, 15, and now in 19. So is that amount of borrowing abnormally high? What's our debt service ratio look like? And you do a lot of towns, so what's your perspective?
Thanks, Mike. My name is Dick Ranigan. I'm president of Northeast Municipal Advisors. About 3 years ago, I retired from my second bank. I was at Durham Savings for 10 years, and prior to that, when it was People's Heritage up the street, now TV, I worked for them, and that's how the relationship started when I started with People's Heritage Bank. Way back, I'll be very brief, I worked for the city of Portland. I was a finance director there. Worked there for 14 years, so that is where I cut my teeth in the municipal finance arena. I've been doing bond issues for cities and towns in Maine and New Hampshire since 1991. And as I said, doing Waterville since the mid-1990s. Municipalities, by their nature, typically borrow money for infrastructure projects, be it capital acquisition of fire trucks, police cars sometimes. Certainly roadways and streets and schools and city buildings all come to the mix, sewer and water projects, if they happen to be yours versus a sewer district or a water district that I know that Waterville has. When you look at your audited financial statements, you're carrying a number right now of city-owned assets at historical cost of about $70 million. That is not replacement cost. God knows what it would be today, but even if we use a number of double that, it's probably not enough. So you have substantial assets. It was mentioned earlier, and I did pick up on that as I was doing my little research today, that geographically, Waterville is very small at about 14 square miles. And yet you have a population of around 17,000. So when you look at some of the ratios, you wonder, why is our debt per capita low in relationship to some other similarly sized communities, some bigger, some smaller? A lot of it goes into geography. You have a smaller, but more dense population on a square mile basis. Municipalities borrow money. Some very small municipalities say we're going to save up money. We're going to buy that fire truck, and we have a target of $250,000. Well, if they ever get to the $250,000, that fire truck now is $450,000. So a long time ago, municipalities said it makes sense for us to borrow for capital projects. When you take a look at roads, which a number of these projects would be infrastructure projects that would be in Waterville, many of them are very long lines. They're very expensive. And if you tried to pick off and say, we're going to put X number of dollars, such as the paving, and we're talking reconstruction here, into your operating budget, you wouldn't do very many linear feet, much less miles of road. And so municipalities say it makes more sense for us to borrow money, be able to do a larger project at a lower per unit cost basis. And Municipalities across the state borrow money. They borrow money one of two ways, maybe a third way. In some cases, there's local banks will loan money. That's not the usual way that it's done. That's on a very small basis. Maybe we'll buy a truck or something like that, and it might be financed locally with the bank. But typically, the larger projects are financed either through the Maine Municipal Bond Bank, which is a quasi-municipal, a quasi-state government agency that pools smaller municipalities' debt and some larger ones into twice-a-year financings, one in the spring and one in the fall. You make application to the bond bank. It's about a 15-page application. You hire bond counsel that makes sure that all the votes were done here legally, and that goes off to the bond bank for acceptance, hopefully, by the bond bank. They then put you into this pool and then issue that debt either spring or fall. The other is the way that many of the larger municipalities, in Waterville case, where it issues debt on its own. Many times I get posed the question, well, why don't we issue debt through the bond bank? We don't have the issuance cost that we might have otherwise if we issued our own debt. The bond bank will tell you that the only cost is the cost of bond counsel. However, what they do is they jack up their rates a little bit and take that money, and that 3 to 5 basis points that they add onto the rate pays them for their cost of issuance. They have a financial advisor, they have counsel, they have printing, they have advertising, all that you do when you issue your debt. So it's just how it's paid versus whether you pay it or not. The bond bank typically does not sell as well as individual issuers. You ask why? Well, many of the issuers that go into the bond bank's portfolio are the very small, unrated municipalities. Also water districts and sewer districts that are lower rated than municipalities that have general taxing authority. All of the larger municipalities in Maine issue debt on their own. And I could name Portland, South Portland, Westbrook, and you go up the spine to Lewiston, Auburn, Augusta, Waterville, and actually 2 years ago, Presque Isle. Presque Isle communities typically go to the bond bank because they're smaller. But Presque Isle had a fairly sizable issue of about $3.5 million, so we did that as a standalone issue. The advantages are you issue when you want, you structure the bond issue how you want, all within any charter restrictions as to how debt can be structured. 3 years ago here, we wanted to dovetail the new debt coming on with old debt coming off the books so that we didn't have a spike in debt service. You don't want that roller coaster, obviously, to have a line item in your budget that fluctuates wildly or spikes up and then goes down over a period of time. What we did is that we structured it such that the first principal payments were 2 years out, when there was a little trough when debt was falling off. You're looking at another, I'll call it small cliff, $300,000 in 2021 and 22, where this debt coming up, should you pass it, would dovetail into that. And so while debt service may be going up over time as you have more and more projects, it's not going to spike. So we try to level it off as much as we can, and that's the planning that we do with Mike and with Heather. I ran some numbers to say, you know, is Waterville off the chart as far as issuing debt? Are we issuing too much debt? Do we have too much debt? Are we too frequent an issuer or not? As far as issuances go, they range from 3 to 7 over the last 7 years. When I looked at Waterville, Augusta, Auburn, Bath, Falmouth, and Gorham, just to pick them off the top of my head today. You have about $20 million worth of principal and outstanding debt. And when you compare it to some of the others, it's lower. I think a lot of that is directly resultant from your smaller geographic base. You don't have as many roads, you don't have as many sidewalks. But you have a downtown, you're obviously a central core service community. So when you look at debt per capita, you're low. You have, again, about 17,000 people in a small area. The other communities, and I didn't try to break out self-paying debt. Some of this might be for a facility that generates revenue. I just said, what's the gross cost per capita? And you can see that most of the others, Gorham, Bath, Auburn, and Augusta, in the mid-2000s, when you're half that. Falmouth is so high because that's school debt. And they have some actually subsidized school debt in Falmouth. You wouldn't think that they would qualify, but it's not on wealth, it's on need. And that would come down on a net basis because it's state subsidized. They'd be down in the $2,000 range as well.
Can you just give a simple definition, please, of debt per capita?
Right, so we have about $20 million worth of outstanding debt. You simply divide it by the number of people within the community, and you get debt per person. So in Waterville, we have about $1,275 worth of debt for each one of us that lives here in Waterville, men, women, and children. If you look across the country, very typical between $2,000 and $3,000 debt per capita. So you're low on a debt per capita. Again, I think because it's a core city that is not spread widely, and so your per capita per mile is low, is high, I'm sorry, and so therefore it looks like it's lower than it might otherwise be. Debt to valuation, here's where equalized state valuation, that's what the state comes up with as to what they believe 2 years ago the city was valued at. That is analogous to your assessed valuation, which is more current. But we use state equalized valuation to compare municipality to municipality. Everybody's in the 2 to 3% range except for Augusta, they're a little bit higher. Augusta has a unique, as every municipality has, unique situation in that they have so much tax exempt debt. So their equalized value is lower than you might think if you drove by a city that didn't have the State House sitting there and all the state buildings. They have to pave all the roads that go by all the state buildings, and yet don't have the value that translates into paying for that debt. So you're not out of whack on either one of those, is what I guess what I come down to saying. What's key for you to consider, and the administration bringing forth projects, is what are your needs? And how are you addressing those needs? As we all know, there's not a truckload of money coming in from the feds or the state to pay for many of these infrastructure projects. They're locally paid for. The best way, and a lot of people will look at debt as, we ought to be borrowing money for those that will use the improvements in the future. And so therefore, rather than try to pay cash, spread the debt over the useful life. Those people that will enjoy those improvements are the ones that will be paying for it. You borrow on a tax exempt basis. It's not commercial borrowing rates. We go into the national market. We sell them competitively. The lowest rate wins. Typically, we get anywhere from 3 to 8 underwriter bidders that will be bidding on your bonds. They get sold to the lowest bidder. Right now, 20-year bonds selling for an average interest rate in the lower threes, say around 3.3%. A couple of years ago, they were under 3.
Yeah, I know, we had a couple of bonds a couple of years ago that were
Correct.
around 2, weren't they?
What's happening is, I'm talking 20 years. If you're talking 10, we are still in a low 2% range. We're looking at 20, we're just 3 to a little bit over. What the Fed has done is taken the short-term rates, as you know, and ratcheted those up about 6 or 7 times over the last 2 or 3 years. So the short-term rates, the 1, the 2-year treasury rates, have risen. The long-term rates have stayed pretty close to not moving much at all. So the curve, instead of being like this, is flattened out. So now short-term rates are 2, long-term rates it's 3, a little bit more than 3, as I said. So it's still a very good time to borrow. I think I mentioned to Mike, back in 1981 when I was at the city of Portland and we sold the Bath Iron Works improvement bonds for the waterfront, bringing the dry dock in, we sold those 20-year bonds at 11.3%. So the comparison of a 3+% market to an 11% market, this is a good market to sell. It's still good. You always want to be a bottom feeder. We've refinanced all of the debt that can be refinanced for the city of Waterville. Those advanced refundings have been taken off the table by the new tax act. We got all those done. And so right now, Waterville enjoys the lowest possible rates that can be had. on its existing debt. Mike?
Well, one thing I mentioned to the council that I've been concerned about, and you and I have talked about, the fact that in the first 6 years I was here, the city funded all of its capital improvements out of our fund balance. And as you know, that's pretty well disappeared, well, half of it has disappeared. So ever since then, we've been borrow. And I wondered, is that the new paradigm for us? Is that we're now into that mode as the only way to finance capital improvements? But you've told me that's really what so many other cities have been in for a while anyway.
Right, there's always few competing things. Tax rate, absolutely. So, very important to have good fund balance. You have a policy of 12%. You've slipped a little bit underneath that right now. Not dramatically, but just a little underneath that. 12% fund balance, in other words, surplus, put aside as compared to budget. That's a good thing. That gets you a good rating. You're an A+ rated community. Many communities in Maine are rated AA, a little bit higher than Waterville. Some are rated a little bit lower. But certainly strength of fund balance, strength of management, both elected and appointed, strength of your balance sheet in general, all of those things, just like analyzing a commercial credit, are very, very important. So I would advise you not to spend down further in your fund balance area. And that's always a tough one, as you're sitting as elected officials hearing from your constituency, I can't afford anymore. But the borrow is not gonna go away. The potholes don't fix themselves, the fire trucks don't fix themselves, the school buildings don't either. And so you know that you at some point are either faced with, let's do good borrowing before it becomes borrowing out of absolute necessity because things are crumbling. And so I advise, and I have a fiduciary responsibility now because we're now licensed to tell you that this makes good sense. When you look at maybe $3 million next year and $3 million the year after, does it make sense to do
Two separate ones.
two separate ones or one together? If their projects are gonna be done over the next couple of years, borrow it together. We can structure it so that that second issue kind of slides in as we did before a year later, and we can do two issues in one, and they look like two issues, but do it in one financing, because your issuance costs run between $40,000 and $50,000, so don't pay it twice.
And you're talking about the city going on its own as opposed to municipal bond bank.
Right, you could go to the bond bank for six, but they're not gonna let you structure it the way you want. You're gonna give it to them, and they're not gonna allow you, possibly, I don't wanna be absolute with them, but they're probably not gonna let you start some of that principal 2 or 3 years out. That does not look good when they put together a whole issue. They like to have it, let's call it plain vanilla, straightforward.
Let's see, what worries me, John, about going the commercial route, we gotta go out and get rated.
Right, it costs money.
$45,000 to $50,000 up front. And what's gonna happen when Standard & Poor or Moody's looks at how much we've used in our surplus and the fact that we're below our 12%? So we've talked about that with Dick lately. I'm really worried about us, our rating, and with the Maine Bond Bank, we don't have to worry about it.
But what's the interest rates over there?
Interest rates at the bond bank are higher than what you sell at. We can go back and show historically when the city has borrowed, and the bond bank borrowed within a month, 2 months of when we borrowed here, they are higher. The reason why the Portland, South Portland's, Westbrooks and Augustas and Lewis and others borrow on their own isn't because they think that this is fun to put this all together. It's because they borrow it cheaper. Now, if you're Mattawam Cake and you need $100,000 for a plow truck, you go to the bond bank. It makes sense. Nothing against Mattawam Cake, but that's the case in point. When you're a core city like this and you can get a good bond rating, and I don't think that the bond rating will be impacted, we test that with the rating agency ahead of time. What do you think if we came to market with these financials now? Where do we think we would lie? They won't give you an absolute, but they'll give you a good indication.
Before we plunge in?
Before we plunge in. The second part of that is that many times underwriters will buy private insurance and layer it on, and that has happened with Waterville in the past. when there were insurance companies that were AAA rated, the insurance premium was pretty cheap to them, 10 grand, and they bought it. They put that on and make your bonds AAA and then remarket them in the marketplace. The only company out there right now is called BAM, and they're AA rated. And an underwriter may choose to layer that on to get the AA rating here. With the bond bank or with going on your own, you're gonna pay the issuance cost one way or the other. And many municipalities don't put a line item in your budget for issuance costs. They build it into the bond issue, just like you would for engineering costs, architectural costs. Those soft costs go in. So the 40 to 50,000 would go into the 3 million or the 6 million as a cost of doing the projects.
And we don't have any money factored into next year's budget for our borrowing costs. So if we decide to go the commercial
problem
route,
is-
we're gonna have to build that in.
At what point do we know what the P&I payments are gonna be? Because this happened the last time, in 2014, it was December. Counselor Mayhew and I were here before we were able to take seats saying, please don't pass this bond, you have no idea what's gonna happen to taxes. And that included the reval in there. And it seemed great for a year, and then we had reval, and then P&I payments hit, and it was a real stick. So it's important when you look at this total number, 7 million is an enormous number compared to like that last issue, that people understand that maybe next year's, it looks all cool when we say we're gonna borrow this, and then next year,
Only
there's nothing
principal,
there.
only interest.
Right, what people need to be very clear on the front end is in year 3 or 2,
Right.
you're gonna get hit with a mill increase cooked in, and the city needs to plan for how you're gonna control every other expense, city and school, to offset that, because it just, can't be absorbed.
Prior to us going out to bid, we will run those pro formas, and we will be very close to the actuals. You don't know till the day that we press the button and the interest rates come in. You don't know with the bond bank until they price. They don't actually do a competitive sale, they do a negotiated sale, and they have a pricing day. And so you find that out the day after they've sold. So you've made that commitment that way, you make this commitment this way. But we know because there's anywhere from 15 to 30 bond issues going every day in the national market. So we know what a AA or an A+ credit is gonna sell like, structured this way. And we'll run those coupons, and I also run it by underwriters, and I have subscription to what's known as the bond buyer, and so every day I get it electronically and I see what the rates were in yesterday's issues that sold. So we know right today, live, what the rates are probably gonna be within a couple of basis points.
We certainly want to try to structure the new bondings so that the biggest payment happens a year that we lose one of our debt service payments, because one bond is completely paid off in 2021.
I think so.
2021's,
We have a payment drop.
yeah, by a couple $100,000, so.
Oh, absolutely.
We talked with Dick about how to structure it,
Yeah.
so that the first payments and, well, we don't even know if we'd have to do a payment in 2019. We'd have to do in 2020, 2021, a little bit more. Then, your point is a good one. We have to be aware of what that number is in 2022, going forward, and that effect on the mill rate.
And-
Mike, can I just add, when are you looking to have the council vote on this? And is there gonna be time to go through, I assume, every item that's listed here, so we could say, well, we'll give you X for this, X for this, X for that, this may not actually be the schedule that you get.
Right, no, I was thinking that we'd be looking at that second page, one that has all the wish lists from the different departments, 6 months from now. So,
And
we're not,
we have sat down with the capital improvement committee and gone through some of these things already, with the idea that we were going to bring this to the council saying, and, I mean, if we don't bond for them or put them in a bond, it's not like these things go away. So we really should be spending $1 million a year on capital improvements, on, making sure that we stay up with our fixed asset schedule and our equipment's not falling apart, we get new equipment. We make sure that the roads are paved, we make sure that everything is, where it should be. $1 million a year is not unrealistic.
So, even though I asked those department heads back there to be here tonight, we didn't expect to get into specific questions about Parks and Rec or police or fire. If you have them, we can certainly answer questions, but they have to come and make their case at a later time. And then the other thing with talking with Dick is, do we borrow in the fall or in the spring of 2019? What are rates looking like?
Yeah. I would prefer to borrow sooner rather than later. Interest rates don't look like they're going down. They look like they're going up, so.
When you look at every other town and city in the state of Maine, though, are there some that choose not to bond, and what do they do for an option?
They don't have very good infrastructure.
You
You know them when you drive through them. Whether it's their schools or their sidewalks or their streets,
But there is no other
or
alternative.
the fire truck that doesn't pump when it shows up for the fire, because the water leaked out of the truck or the pump doesn't work.
I would just ask that, I think it's just important to tuck in our mind. I know last year we had talked about looking at legal possibilities for fee schedules for nonprofits, because people in the audience know our fire and police are getting called out like twice a day, over 600 times a year, to just the colleges and hospitals alone. We brought that up last year. Colby College came out and bought us a cruiser. Nobody else did anything, and we asked them for a lot less than that. At some point, there's gotta be a pickup of the cost for, say, like, you know, if we need a new fire truck, people who are calling the fire department, particularly with false alarms every couple nights because somebody's drunk in a dorm, they gotta pay for this stuff. So I would just ask the council to get serious about, and maybe we just need to bring in Bill Lee to see what our legal remedies could be as far as what we can charge for, what we can't, because that's something that should be looked at within what those annual fees could be and how that might offset some. I realize it's not gonna offset the entire debt schedule, but trying to keep all options on the table of how this stuff gets paid for. Because I see the police in my neighborhood, when they drop off a council packet, that's it, and my tax bill's pretty big, so.
I see, you know, in my neighborhood, I see the fire department fairly because the people in my neighborhood are older, and the fire department are the ones who come out when somebody falls, you know, and that's a big part of what they do in Waterville. So thank God for the fire department.
Speaking of the fire department,
Yes, absolutely.
congratulations to Sean Essler, who will be the new fire chief.
New fire chief, sitting next to the old fire chief.
Any other questions for Dick?
Very well presented, Dick.
Thank you.
Did a very good
If
job.
anything comes up through Mike or Heather, let me know, we'll get the answers that you need.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very much so.
Good to see you again,
Dick
John.
has been really responsive every time I have a question. He's quick. So.
Oh, yeah, it's very comforting for both of us to know that.
He's
when we
talked
need
me
the
off
numbers.
the edge.
I think they have.
Oh, I'm sorry. Other question, yes.
Thank you. I have a question. So, have you spoken to the superintendent of schools to see possible bond issues coming up at that end as well? To see the total issues that might be facing the city, because
Eric hasn't told me of any that are coming up,
Okay.
but we certainly always include schools in, when we get into the big capital improvement planning, we do. Yeah.
because I know there's 2 boilers at about $250 each that they spoke about having to bond for in the pretty near future,
Okay,
from what I understood at one of our
Well-
meetings.
they should probably look at getting on this list.
Okay, I'll talk to Eric. And is there a way for the computer to take into account when looking at our credit rating, the population and factor that in? You know, you said we're very densely populated. Is there a way to adjust for that to see how we actually rate? And the cost of living is much lower in Waterville than Portland. So does that affect the debt ratio?
From the rating agency standpoint, they look at everything. And they understand Waterville and its size and its population, and they certainly understand that Colby College is here and the other institutions that are here, and what they do and what their impacts are. When we applied for rating, we have a rating call with them.
Okay.
We provide a document, it's called the official statement, that's got all of the financial and demographic data of the city in it.
Yep.
They get that, they pour through it, they then grill us with questions, and we have a back and forth. And at the end of the day, it goes to a committee, and then they look at comparables between Maine and across the country. Where does Waterville fit?
Right,
Yeah.
yeah. So for me, it's quite reassuring someone like you guides Mike Roy. I'm not picking on Mike, but when you hear a bond for $6 million, presumably if the city manager wanted to borrow X amount, 10 or 12 million, you could talk them out of it. They work very closely with you and they have expert guidance in that. The point that is a risky amount to borrow.
Right, it's all dependent on the projects and the need for the projects. I'm working on my largest one right now, is a New Morris High School, $74 million. So there are big projects out there and there are smaller projects.
Right, but for Waterville, you know. the
This
whole
looks a lot better
picture.
now.
And so you would really advise the city manager as to what's a safe amount, so. it's
I work
kind of-
very closely with both, and all that.
Well, that's reassuring as a resident.
Cough, sneeze.
Thank you.
Allergies.
Other questions? Great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
See you
Thank
again.
you.
Oh, thank you, I appreciate that, I really need it.
Teamwork.
She'll use it once.
Is it tree?
Let's go right.
You get the call.
Not much to see. Thanks.
Debt service.
Debt service in your book, not much to look at, but since we're here, talking about debt service, it's page 40 in your book.
They're on the
I
back
didn't
table.
sneeze on it, I'm sorry.
Debt service is this year, in theory, going down.
By, what, $45,000?
Yes.
And should continue to go down.
Yep.
Until we borrow again. And one of those, probably in 2011, gets paid off in 2021.
Yes.
Okay.
What page we on, Mike?
40.
40. 40.
Not much there. Now, when we, in the past, the 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth line down is where we put in the bonding expenses. That's for Dick and the bond council and others. In the past, we've had a number there. We didn't plan for a number for this next year. As Dick said, those costs can be rolled into the borrowing when we get to that point.
Yeah, so I do have the entire actual debt schedule here. This year is going down by like 45. Next year, it should go down around 30. And then it'll go down almost 200,000 the next year.
So 18-19 is 45, 19-20 is 30, and 2021 is 200.
Approximately, yeah.
Okay.
What are we gonna retire, the 2012?
And that's quite a ways off. That's-
2033.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are retiring something, I guess.
Yeah. The
2011, right?
2011B bond
Yeah.
is being retired in 2021.
And that was a refinancing at the time, and I should have said to Dick earlier, give him credit, because he's the one who called us and said, you know, you really should refinance your existing bonds, which we did. Some of you were here.
Yeah.
And we saved, $40,000, I think, or more, 1 year, or annually.
Annually, for 10 years.
Right.
Over 400,000. What you do is you retire a piece of every issue every year. One more year comes off, and so you're paying interest on a lower amount. That's why you see it ratcheting down, even if you're not paying off a whole issue, that last payment. So you're lopping off everything that was due in fiscal 18 this year.
And each bond issue has a number of different years in it. So when we go to do an issue, we say, okay, obviously the roads are gonna last longer than the equipment. So we're gonna bond for the equipment for 10 years, the roads are gonna be 20 years. So halfway through, you see a big drop, because that entire thing is gone.
It's the expected lifespan, basically. Correct.
Mhm.
Well,
Okay, the next item,
Revenue.
the last item on the agenda for tonight was the revenue, because we hadn't touched on the revenue. This is really the last, well, we have touched on revenue when we've looked at other departments.
yeah.
But we just put it on the event for pages 1 through 4. If there are any questions on revenues, like I said, we've been through.
We've done all the department ones.
Does this include, like you had talked about, did the council decide on that, plan that Dexter had made money on, of suing and getting money?
I'm gonna put something together and present it to you
Okay.
in one of the next few council meetings.
Yeah.
That is
Right.
not included in here.
Okay.
Okay.
That goes back to those service charges that you were talking about the fire and everything. I've put together,
Not
like
suing.
Fairfield, what?
Not suing.
Right.
Not suing,
Right,
right,
insurance claiming.
correct. Did I say sue?
No, I did.
Oh.
It's one
I'm putting together a bunch of information. Fairfield has an ordinance that charges, you know, after your second false alarm, that you start getting charged per occurrence, per year, that sort of thing. So I'm putting together a number of those sort of ordinances and everything, so that you guys can look at them and say, yeah, this is what we wanna do, or no, we definitely don't wanna do that. Great.
So if you go down page 1 quickly, you see there's no change really in the category on interest and taxes, 93.5 and 93.5. Next, with motor vehicle excise, which is, motor vehicle excise has now become our biggest revenue source. Used to be state revenue sharing, and now motor vehicle excise at $1,850,000. So we decided to budget the same amount going forward. It's been a pretty strong revenue source, but it's not gonna grow.
We've raised it, I think we raised it this past budget year, and so we hit just above it, but I didn't wanna increase it too much. If we hit 1,860,000 again, I'll suggest to increase it, but until I have enough of those increases, I don't wanna bank on revenue we're not gonna get.
So really, as we go through this, we're comparing column B with column F. And you can see on the state reimbursements, we lost 126,000 there. Almost all of it, well, more than all of this is in Betty.
Mhm.
That, that tax exempt program has really, really hurt us. IT, money we collect from other towns is constant. Auto registrations, on to page 2, these are most of the receipts from Patty's office, city clerk. Stayed pretty constant, loss of 2,100 there.
We gotta get more marriages and dogs in town.
Well, we really
You
dipped
know.
in burials.
Right, and I'm not gonna wish for more burials, but I can wish for more marriages and dogs. Yeah.
If you pass an ordinance for me to take a second wife, I will.
On the dogs, only if they actually use the bags that the quarry road provides.
You gotta talk to your wife first, Julian.
I'll make this marriage.
The next category is the public works and solid waste. The big changes there. This should be the last year of seeing those big fluctuations, because now we're in a stable relationship going to Norwich Walk. No more Perk, no more Oakland on trash stuff. That will even out. Police revenues, next item, increase there, primarily in, well, I guess whoops, is that correct?
No, wait, yeah, it is. It is, the addition is correct. We need to actually take out the funding for school patrol officer.
So is that in the school budget?
No, that's
So
why
okay, so
I have to take it out of here.
unfortunately, the media is not here, but, So to be clear, the school is not opted not to put the school resource officer in the budget, and we're just gonna pick it up.
What?
I think the school pays a third of it towards the resource officer.
Last year that was cut.
Not anymore.
The city picks up the entire thing. I have not been told that the school put it back in. We put it back in thinking, but my understanding is it needs to come back out.
That needs to come back out. Okay, we're gonna have to make that correction then.
Yep.
So we would have no school resource officer?
We have the school resource officer, it's
We're
just the
paying the
city
full boat.
pays.
So we have no
his
revenue.
That's what we did last,
salary.
well, I mean, that's a policy decision. It is what we decided
Right.
last year.
We figured out, I think
We
if
have
I'm
no
not mistaken, that it would have cost, like sending someone out from the police department to deal with issues in the schools would not have been cost effective. So we were in a situation where.
6-1.
Right.
So this says we have no revenue, but we still have the school resource officer.
Yeah, before the school was paying for it, so that counted as a revenue on our side, right?
Right,
He,
when they were paying.
yeah, he,
But they are adding new positions, they're just not adding this pay, just to be clear. In their current budget.
the school,
Correct.
the school board member, yeah.
Yeah, sorry,
That-
the question?
Good job.
My
Yeah.
understanding
I
is
wasn't
they
sure it's
do
open to
have
public.
additional positions in their
There is
budget.
additional positions created, there's also additional loss of positions, so I don't know the exact total, but there was some positions created. One of them being a social worker, well, at present, it's not approved, but is a social worker for the Albert Hall School, but I also, thought it was a good idea. So there is, there was a total of 600,000 new ones that we cleared 300,000 off and approved 300,000 of the positions that the administration wanted us to have.
Either way, for now, we should back that revenue out.
Correct, I will do that.
Next category is the reimbursement we received from the town of Winslow for the fire chief sharing. As far as we know, Winslow is still gonna join with Waterville to share one chief. They still have to make their final decision over there, but we're confident that they're gonna keep the arrangement we've had. So that's what that item is that reimbursement from Winslow.
It's a percentage of the salary and benefits and everything, so that may change slightly depending on the final numbers, but negligible.
Next category is a big drop. Building permits, plumbing permits, electrical, because if you look in column B, you'll see that we have the sum of 200,000 budgeted, which is nowhere near close to what we've actually taken in at 350. But we knew we were gonna be collecting huge revenues from the buildings in the downtown especially.
How about the athletic complex?
That is the huge increase.
That's the
Up on
350.
campus,
Yeah, so we're not gonna have that kind of revenue source for next year. That's why we budgeted 150.
Which is still a lot higher than it had been in the past. So we are still anticipating, much bigger revenues than it had been in 16, 17, and a few years prior to that.
Yeah.
And then you said the plumbing fees was a mistake, right? The 60,000 last time?
Yeah, I still think that was a mistake.
That was the number the whole time, I don't know.
Yeah, she can't take any credit for that.
Oh,
I'm totally passing the buck on that one.
okay.
Yeah. I mean, we knew we were gonna be collecting a lot of plumbing permits from the
Right.
Colby buildings, but not 60 right now. I think that was a mistake
I'm
the last
still
time.
waiting.
I don't think there's anything much left on page 3, page 4, the recreation revenues.
You'll see a huge increase in Quarry Road. That's because we're actually showing the revenues, but again, we're also showing the expenses, so it kind of,
It's a wash.
yeah.
Airport, next category. Again, the airport side of things is all really dependent on the fuel. That's where the big surges happen. Cemetery, last category. Fund balance, targeted at 0. Drug forfeiture, or none there. TIF funds, same amount as last year. We probably should.
There's no
have
drug
shown
forfeiture
for-
funds?
Huh?
No drug forfeiture funds?
None budgeted.
Non-budgeted.
When we prepared this back in February, there wasn't a whole lot.
There's still, there's
So what is there?
approximately like 40,000 in there, now. And, but they're planning on using the majority of that for the upgrade to, you can probably talk about this.
Well, the software dispatch.
My protocol, software, gonna cost us about $40,000. It's something that we need to have if we wanna continue to, provide the level of services to our customers that they expect.
So that's it on revenues. And I guess really that's it for tonight. Next Tuesday is what we have.
We have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
It's a general question, not on a department.
Okay.
Seeing that, a big part of tonight's discussion was future, am I to assume then that the budget is going to be ready for the June 5th council meeting to present the first time?
I think a lot of that question depends on what happens next Tuesday night, the 29th. So that's been planned as a wrap-up session of the budget. Will we get all the questions answered? Will the council need more information? So I can't tell you if the vote's gonna be June 5th or not. I think we'll know better after next Tuesday.
I think it's important.
Of course,
We can always schedule additional meetings also.
I would vote for that.
You need what, two votes on the budget anyway, eventually.
Right. Heather and I have gone through and prepared a list of what we would suggest as proposed cuts. Because we knew, when we submitted the budget, 3 mills is not at all practical reason. That's what we felt was needed to see the town operate as it has. And of course, the real big thing with the 3 mills was the loss of 1.4 million.
Well, you didn't
One time. Let me just
do
finish.
3 mills.
I'm sorry?
It's a combined budget is 3 mills.
I didn't hear that.
Combined budget
Combined
is 3
school
mills.
and city, yes.
Yeah, yes, combined school and city, right. So, we talked with the school department, we have a list of proposed cuts that we can submit next week. It would be good if between now and next Tuesday, could meet Heather and I with counselors 1 or 2 at a time, just to show you the list. You get thinking about it, ask questions. Next Tuesday, maybe a lot easier meeting, if you've had time to get exposed to some of these thoughts.
It would also be helpful if people had like concrete ideas of, okay, you don't want these increases, where do you propose that we cut? I can come up with little things here and there that might trim, the small amounts of fat that we have, but we're running lean. So if you are insistent that this is way too much, I need practical ideas of where we want to cut.
No, so Mike, and I brought this up with Heather, but it's important people understand, because we've had a decrease in revenues of about 1.8 million from last year. But we had about 900, we had hundreds of thousands of dollars in one-time purchases last year.
Right.
So while we say spending is down 60 or 80 grand, normalized spending is actually up hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I talked to Heather
Operational
beforehand,
expenses are.
and it sounds like the majority of that is salary and benefits on the city side.
Yeah,
Is that correct?
majority of that is personnel-related costs. Yeah.
And a lot of it's insurance.
Yeah, there was a 60% increase in insurance.
Right.
And then there's a number of contracted raises, not raises, but cost of living adjustments.
Things that we
for
can't
union
trump.
Yeah, we can't,
employees.
we don't, all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I don't wanna go before the council there, do they,
No.
anybody else have a? Okay, my question is, How much less are you getting from revenue sharing from the state?
It's about 1.4 million less a year,
From its high, yeah.
From
average.
how many years? Has it gone down steadily, or?
Well, it's been since 2000, and actually it started during the Baldacci administration. So it started before 2010, so it's been 10 years. And so that amount, as you know, Marilyn, has gone down, 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 down. But if you take that full loss over the 10-year period, it's an average of about 1.4 million a year.
We're supposed to get, in theory, 5%, and they've been funding it at 3.
Well, I think it's 2.3.
Yeah.
2.3?
Yeah, it's below
Yeah,
3.
it's less-
Compared to last year, what are we getting this year?
We were going to get a little bit more.
Yeah,
It's
it's-
about 60,000 more, maybe?
And last year compared to the year before was roughly equal?
Yeah.
Or a little
Yeah,
bit more?
we're at
A
1.1
little bit
now.
more.
So it's, but just to be clear, it's not going down every year.
We're at
It's-
1.1
It's staying steady
million.
at the lower rate.
At one year, in the height of it, in 2007, this city received 2.9 million in state revenue sharing. Now we're getting 1.1.
Right, and I just wanna point out that that's not like money that we're getting as a gift from the state, that it's our money, it's our tax money that we pay here, that by all rights should be coming back to support city services, and it's not.
Yeah, no,
So,
It's a portion of the sales tax.
We earn-
that's
we
right
earn that
in
money.
this.
we pay it,
We earn that money,
And we have been getting it for some 40-something years.
right.
We don't,
right.
It's
we
a
don't pay it.
commitment.
It's a sales tax, and then we're supposed to get a portion
So
back.
is
We
that-
don't, we don't have.
Pay
a-
on the-
Because
You
it's
do
just-
the Waterville
because
stories
we
every
don't have a
day.
portion
Right,
sales
we
tax.
There's no proposal to increase the amount
We
in
should make
next
meals
year's
and lodging.
state budget.
Garvin has a
Do you always go down there and fight for that?
hotel.
Got tired of doing that. Winifred went on
I
our behalf.
went, not this April, but the previous April, to testify in favor of revenue
But
sharing.
we have an election coming up, so look at the candidates' positions and look for the ones who are ready to go there and fight for revenue sharing. It's as much of a plug as I can give, not naming people. Yeah, because I think that's the single most important factor that
Makes
affects
big
what we can do with our
difference.
budgets.
A
Yeah,
lot of cities are struggling because they don't
Right.
have that.
that's right.
So I will say, when I was there testifying, there were a number of town managers from other communities and
It's a
Fire
the service
association.
center communities that got hit the hardest.
Mike, I have some quick questions. Did I hear you say that you had rejected the amount that Eric had sent to you for our budget? Because at the moment I understood presented the budget for school
Right,
budget.
and then Heather and
We
I,
don't reject
Okay,
anything.
so
But
as it
we-
stands.
we asked him to consider
As it stands, nothing's been accepted.
an additional series of, well, a total of 200,000 in cuts. He said he had to go to the board, so you'll be hearing about it.
But to be clear, cuts is 200,000 less of a two point,
Less than
over
proposed.
2-point-something million increase.
We asked him to reduce the amount
Not
that
really
he
a cut.
proposed to spend by $200,000.
Right, that's,
That's
I
the
just wanna
correct
be
way to
clear,
say
because
it.
sometimes cut, that's kinda like government lingo, we're not actually cutting,
Yeah.
we're saying increase by less.
Okay, and the other question is.
Decreasing the increase.
Right.
Correct.
All sounds like politics to me. Was there any study ever done on the cost of privatization of public works? Or any thought on it?
No, you're welcome to do it if you'd like.
Well, no, but.
Well, I have
I know
asked,
we have,
And the
I already know the answer.
well,
Wait.
Well, okay,
well, I don't,
Greatly increases
that's what I'm
costs.
asking.
Yeah.
that, we
Yeah.
don't, hang on, we don't know that there are, we don't know for a fact, like, there are some towns, granted, they're not like Waterville, like Herman, and other towns that do privatize certain aspects of things like
Yeah.
snow plowing.
I was just gonna say, Public Works is a big umbrella.
So there are specific things that in some cases, but I wanna be clear, because I've asked for this to happen. And what we get is, we don't know until we go out and ask for bids on that, whether it's cheaper or not. It might be, it might not be, but we don't know.
Well, I'd ask.
But we did do that for
Trash.
trash.
Trash, yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
some pieces have been
I was gonna
researched.
say, it's kinda late to ask,
Mhm.
when
It's
we
a-
just bought a truck.
Right,
No,
right,
Exactly,
trash
so we
was
did do
looked
the
at.
We
research
analyzed
before
before we
we
made
bought
that
it.
choice.
Although we did find out that if we had just thrown everything away in Norwich Walk, that it would've been cheaper than getting this book.
And the other, because I'd actually asked at
The
the
recycling
previous
program
year's
costs.
budget meeting about was it cost effective? Right, but you're saying it's not. The last question was.
Not practical.
Okay, was the oil ever bid out this year?
The, motor fuels, yes. Heating oil, not yet.
Okay,
Am I correct, Mark, on that? Motor fuels, we're gonna be with the main power option bid.
right.
And heating oil, we usually go in with the school, but I don't think that's happened yet.
Because last year when I roughly priced it, it was Augusta Fuel was about $2,500 cheaper through them than any other company.
Bless you.
I don't work for them, I don't know anyone who works for Augusta Fuel. So.
Okay.
Other questions?
Motion to adjourn.
Next Tuesday.